on the show, we've had a lot of people that are directly in or adjacent to energy or power conversation. Most of them are either in the generation business or they're in the advisory business. I've not talked to anybody close to the utility business. They're familiar with it or they interact with them. Why do you think we're having the congestion that we're having, or are we not having congestion? Is it we're misunderstanding the problem?
I think the major issues that we're experiencing right now is probably a combination of two major things. The first is that the industry itself, utilities that are, they haven't really experienced growth at all for probably the good part of 2 decades.
Really?
Yeah. They've seen negative growth to flat growth within their infrastructure. And that really generated the second issue, which is that when you don't have growth for that long, you kind of lose the muscle memory, but you also have a lot of assets that go unused for a while. And so when data centers first started showing up and saying that they needed to be connected to the grid and they want, like utilities, not only were they eager to fall all over themselves to really connect those, but they had spare capacity to do it. Now, those assets are old. The technology is out of date, and there's a lot of investment that has to be made to catch up because there hasn't had a regular refresh of some of these assets that may be 50, 30, 20 years old. These are really long-lived assets, and we need a lot more of them right now.
I'm familiar with power on my site from most of our sites from the substation in. So I'm receiving high voltage, I'm stepping it down to medium voltage, and then I'm distributing it through my infrastructure. I know the terms distribution, transmission, generation, and I have conversations with people that are, they're confident in what they're talking about. I have no idea if they're accurate or not. But that substation to me looks pretty sophisticated. It looks pretty robust. Like one of my data centers down the street here in Atlanta where we're recording this is the old Sears and Roebuck catalog distribution building. They built that as a 200-year building. And so if I were to tell you, hey, I've got a data center in this building that was built in the 50s, PUE and efficiency notwithstanding, a lot of people would assume this isn't a robust building until you get down there and see, like, this is one of the original nuclear bomb shelters. It's 1 million square feet. I have 3, not quite that size, equal in power or greater in power, but not that same footprint. 3 more on that campus. Like, it's built out. But it would be incorrect to assume that infrastructure is not robust. You go in there and you see these 24-inch concrete, like, it is amazing. So when I see the substation, either the ones we're putting in or the ones that have already existed, they look spectacular. So is the obsolescence, is it in generation where it is? Is it in transmission? Is it distribution? Is it where do you think, is it equally distributed? Like some places are, like they're all sort of struggling to keep up, or is it just different pockets? When you think about this and you talk to people about it, how should they understand what the quote unquote grid looks like? Well,
there are really 2 different problems going on there too.
Okay.
The first problem is those assets, because they're so long-lived for a lot of them, and they've been around quite a lot of time, they need to be replaced. They're not really capable of handling the amount of basically stress that's going to happen when they're connected to a data center.
When you say stress, what do you mean?
Data centers are particularly sensitive to voltage conditions, and they themselves draw a lot of power,
right?
And that's going to put a lot of load on those assets, and that's going to basically stress them and wear them down faster. The other problem, though, is that these technologies are largely, they're not cutting edge,
right?
Right. These are things that have been around, and the basic designs have been around for as long as power grids have been here. And what we're seeing in that space is there's a whole lot of new digital technology that's coming in that's giving a lot more insight into how the assets are performing, giving more finer control on how to use them, which increases or enables the utility to do more and the customer to do a lot more with those assets. But if you've got a 50-year asset and it's only been 10 years depreciated, that's still 40% or 90%, 80% can't do math. I'm a lawyer.
We don't do math on
Right,
podcasts,
yeah.
Raiford.
Good, because I'm a lawyer. I don't do math. But you've got a lot of that asset that's still left to depreciate. Who's going to pay that cost? So you're kind of dealing with, okay, do I retire the asset? Maybe it's stressed. Maybe it needs to be retired. Do I replace it with something that's brand new technology? And that will give me more control, but how long is that going to be there? Data centers have one other really unique aspect to it, which is it's the most capital-intense industry I've ever seen where the product is so uncertain. I mean, just think about it. When you go build a power plant, or excuse me, a car manufacturing facility, right? You're going to build cars in that thing for 50 or 100 years, right? And everybody needs a car, and we know that. Right. You're going to build something to do washing machines or some other big thing, oil refinery, whatever. These things are really long-lived assets. Data centers, on the other hand, the product that they produce, not only is the underlying technology, the chip, being replaced at an incredibly fast rate as you refresh those, but the underlying software that's actually being running on those data centers is just constantly under change. So it's really hard to think about, like, well, what's my power draw going to look like? What's the infrastructure to support that really going to look like? Whereas, if I'm building a factory to make paint, I can pretty much figure out what that straight line looks like out into the future for a really long time.
Yeah.
It's not just a problem of having power generation. It's the entire supply chain behind it, and it's the infrastructure that's already in place. And we're simultaneous. And new technology coming at the same time.
Right.
So we're hitting it with new technology that's been there, or existing capabilities that have been there for quite some time, and then an incredible amount of demand all at once, and a supply chain that I don't think has the ability necessarily to keep up with that.
I know you're an attorney. You probably want things more absolute, but I'm asking this. Do you think the stress is greater on generation? Do you think it's greater on transmission, both existing transmission and future transmission? Do you think it's on distribution? I haven't heard a lot of people talking about distribution. If there is one, where do you think the stress would be?
Well, I kind of think of it as the system. If you can imagine one of those balloon dogs that you get at a fair or whatnot,
yeah.
Let's say that's the system. If you squeeze one part of the dog, the other parts all kind of inflate. That's kind of how I would analogize the whole thing, which is to say they're all under stress, and depending on whichever one you're short of or whichever one is squeezed right now, the other ones are probably experiencing pain. So you've kind of got this dynamic. I hate to say it doesn't really matter this generation that you have excess of or transmission or whatever. They've all got challenges right now.
Yeah, that's funny. I hadn't thought about that. We're going to have to work in, squeeze the dog, make an anteater or something like that in the title of the podcast. But that's true. You squeeze it, and whatever that original shape is, it's different.
Well, it's a system,
right?
And I think lawyers included, we all like things in little boxes.
Right.
But the problem is you're talking about a dynamic system, like a human body, for example, right? If you have high blood pressure, that doesn't just affect your heart; it affects all the other functioning of your body too. Yeah. Right now, generation, transmission, distribution, we think of them in parts, but they're really all one thing.
Yeah. Did my wife text you before you came in here? Because I feel like shots just got fired. Are there parts of the country where it's easier to get transmission through, or just because the legislature is different or the population's different than other parts of the country?
I mean, in general, building big energy infrastructure is going to require some sort of either federal or state interactions. And, I have found that some places of the nation are more difficult to do that in than others, primarily those that are, they have let's just say a bias towards regulation and legal frameworks that require a lot of review before any of that infrastructure is put into place. On the other hand, there are other places that want to have it, and they will cut red tape like crazy to make it happen. Regardless, the timelines for a lot of these things are still unacceptable to data center companies, and even I would say to the utilities themselves. Part of that is that the process for regulatory or legislative review doesn't have a date certain to it. So if you said, hey, I've got a data center that I want to go put in XYZ location, the utility may be all for it. You may be super eager and have everything lined up to go do it. But if you can't get the permitting and the legislative and regulatory sign-offs to make it happen, you're just going to be sitting there twiddling your thumbs, and it's not you nor the utility's problem. And that's because the laws themselves don't require, say, you have 18 months to do all your reviews and get everything wrapped up. These bodies can take and then appeal and go through a process that can take a very long time to make things happen.
Is that new? Because I don't remember that really being a problem. We've been doing this, our company's been doing this over 20 years, and I just don't remember, like, getting to a substation sometimes could be a challenge. But if you could get to the substation, it was, I just don't remember it being a challenge.
Well, it goes back to that problem I mentioned at the very top of our conversation, which is that for the longest times, utilities have had almost no growth and a lot of excess capacity sitting around because we had manufacturing here and we had a lot of growth and energy usage in the nation, and it's gone. And because of that, they were desperate for growth. And they could absorb all of the new connections for the last 20 years and not really eat into and get up to that part where they say, okay, suddenly now I have to make a whole lot of new investments. We've now reached that point. I mean, you're looking at the typical utility where you get a major data center company that says, hey, I want to build a data center, $1 billion, whatever investment in your service territory. That utility over the next few years is going to double in size, depending on how big that data center is. I remember cases where we were 70-60% of the utility's entire load.
Really?
Yeah, that's enormous. And when you start thinking about what that means for the utility and how much infrastructure they have to put in place, let alone process, procedure, and everything else.
Right.
If they had spares before, they don't anymore, right?
Yeah.
And that's an enormous amount of growth to deal with.
Is it attractive? Help me to understand how the investment works. I mean, would they not just go to whoever, if you're not necessarily to the citizens in the house, but if you're going to some industry or industries and they're putting a stress like this, wouldn't you just say, you're paying for it? Is that how it works, or is that a naive way, or is it vary depending upon where you are?
Well, I mean, honestly, up until recently, where Ohio and a few other spots started to raise this issue, utilities were largely treating this the same way they treat a new Kroger or Home Depot or Walmart. And they were giving them the same kind of terms and conditions, like, okay, that's fine, we can have a contract that's short term and whatever for collateral. Now they're starting to realize that these are massive investments, and the amount of money that's needed to do it, it puts so much strain on the utility. They're going to start looking at things like maintenance capex and cash flow in general to think like, how do I swallow this elephant? And so they're going to try and do things to help minimize risks for cross subsidization and the challenges to the utility's own balance sheet. And they're certainly going to charge for it. But it's a problem I don't think utilities have ever seen of this scale or magnitude.
I would imagine, but I don't know. I'm completely ignorant of this. But one of the things when an organization like ours deploys a data center, we are bringing the most creditworthy customers that are doing long-term agreements. And so what that means on the other side of that is the investors that invest in these organizations have a lot of confidence. I know where those dollars are going to come. I mean, as much as I can in any investment. We're not offering out financial advice here in this conversation. But I'm wondering if you're a utility, does that not also come into play?
When utilities do have a credit-worthy counterparty that's got great cash flow, great credit ratings, et cetera, like they can bank on that and they can go get the money. Money's not a challenge, not a real challenge. It's just the size, the magnitude of it. It's so big that they've not thought about, I need to go build 1,000 megawatts of new generation, and I need to build a new substation and 100 miles of new transmission in two different directions with two different sets of circuits coming in. And do it all simultaneously for one customer. One of the challenges I see often is that the data centers want a date certain to know that their interconnection and their capacity is there and ready for them, right? But if you look at the contracts and the way the utilities structure, it's like if you don't hit these performance metrics and use this amount of energy, I'm going to penalize you. Similarly, I have a whole lot of caveats on why I may or may not be able to make my delivery date.
Right.
And it seems I don't think the utilities are intending to be difficult to deal with there. But it is definitely the risk and the issues there are definitely tilted towards one side versus the other.
Yeah.
But utilities could offer more certain guarantees. And that's something that they could negotiate with their customers, and I believe customers are willing to pay for it. The challenge for the utility then will be, the place where I buy transformers, as an example, is sold out through 2030. How am I going to buy one? Because it's not like if this customer doesn't show up
Right.
or they push the date somewhere in the future, I can reuse that transformer somewhere else. It's such big and specialized equipment for the size load that we're talking about. Right. It doesn't have a lot of uses elsewhere. So some do, like breakers and whatnot, but others don't. And when you have that kind of a thing, the utility is suddenly carrying really big financial and operational risk to kind of hang out. But that's, to me, a point of negotiation in trying to figure out what's the right structure or contract for guaranteeing a date certain, where the utility will say, I absolutely will make sure it shows up on this date, and these are all the things financially and legally and everything else that I have to make that happen.
So how do you imagine some of the ways we're going to tackle it to try to fix it?
Well, I think going back to take the same problem we had in World War II, when we were thinking, oh my gosh, we have to suddenly build a lot of capability to basically supply the free world with machinery, equipment, weapons. It wasn't just let's go build plants that churn out tanks. It was also we needed to have the energy infrastructure behind it to go with it. We lack as a nation right now the industrial strategy and vision that is really necessary to do this, because while a utility here or an OEM there may have similar views, there's not really a lot of coordination between them or with the data center companies to actually flesh out this vision and get everybody at the same rhythm, doing the same thing and churning out the same results. So I'd say kind of step one is have that national strategy. Step two is once you have it, is we have to make a lot of investments, and not just in transformers or electrical infrastructure. It's everything in our supply chain, everything in the supply chain for the data centers. They have to be conjoined to some degree to be able to make all of this work. And the third is get to building the infrastructure and get it done, right? And then I think we can make it, but first we have to have that common vision.
So when we were talking off camera before we got started about Eisenhower and roads and whatever, so we had a common vision, we put people to work. It was a different, with same country, but different world then. The Gulf was named different, for example, other things were different. But I guess my question is, maybe I don't understand exactly how, when we say utility,
right,
how that works. Before we started talking about power in the last few years, I would just say, well, the way that gets solved is you go to the marketplace. So, for example, you need chips, you need to be better software and innovation. We're not asking the government, whether that's state government, local government, or federal government, usually to solve it. The marketplace innovates, and we create what the government would do is create an opportunity for businesses to thrive, contracts to be equitable across boundaries, and all these other things. You could hold people accountable for not delivering, but they got out of the way, and they more or less, and they let the marketplace do it. When we're talking about generating, transmitting, or distributing power, so far we've only really talked about utilities. Do we go when we, does the government, maybe part of their vision is, and by government, I don't know if that's federal or state, whatever, but here's how generation works, like nationally or locally. This is what transmission looks like. This is what it looks like from a public utility, a legislative funded, whatever. This is what it looks like if you want to make your own power. What are we, I don't know what I'm trying to say. What don't we understand? What should we understand in that?
Well, to use an analogy based on my own background, Mike, so I started out as an engineer. That was my undergraduate.
Okay.
And then I went to B school and I got my MBA and then I got my law degree. And the reason why I did such an eclectic mix of things was I realized that there was no silver bullet to solve any one problem, right? You had to have a combination of views to really be able to pull those threads together. I think that's really what the government could do in this space, or what some national convening of energy infrastructure and data center and technology companies really need is to come together. And whether that's the government or whether it's just within our industries, we all need to be at the same table saying, this is our strategy and this is how we need to go do it. But we need that convening that crosses all those boundaries to make sure we are all understanding the priority and investing with a common vision in mind, which is we have to grow not just energy, not just the infrastructure side, not just technology, but all of it together to make this sort of vision of where we want to be as a nation and these capabilities. And if we don't do it, we're not going to make it.
Yeah. Do you think there's an opportunity then? A lot of people are talking about, I don't like the term microgrid so much as it doesn't seem as descriptive as on-site power. So there's a lot of conversation about on-site power where, a utility can't keep up, presumably, or for whatever reason, they, without getting into what type of power that would be, is that part of the solution, or do you think it's primarily in the public, or how do you imagine, what's the role of on-site power?
Yeah, I mean, probably, I remember when I was at one of these companies, I used to say when people would ask me, like, hey, should we build a microgrid with our data centers, which were hundreds of megawatts in size? And I said, how much money do you think we have to light on fire? And it was never the right answer.
Right. What happens when that bumps into, I need this 100 megawatts in 3 years?
Right.
And with all of the best communication, all of the best spirit, all of the other things that utility says, or the public provider of something, I can't get you there until 7. Do you just not do it? Or do you find a way to do it and give them the keys? You build it to a spec that they're familiar with? Like, how do you imagine that happening?
Yeah, and that's one of these convening things that I keep talking about, is that what I typically find is that the data centers will get impatient and start doing those sorts of things, but often where they want to site that generation, where they want to put those resources, it's maybe not suitable from an air quality perspective or permitting perspective. Maybe it's not the best place on the grid to have it. From the utilities perspective, it's similarly, they've got challenges too, and like they keep, neither side is really sitting down to say, like, hey, let's solve it together. Like, you need it in 3 years. Okay, we will find a way to make it happen in 3 years. Often the utility's like, okay, these are the 5 tools I always use, and I'm going to keep using the 5 tools. And not because they're being stubborn or hard-headed or they're not very bright. It's because when you're responsible for the safety and the economy of a nation, you tend to be conservative and you want to make sure things are going to work. That's and these are the things that work. But I think that they both have to come together, and they got to state, here are my issues, and I got to make this happen. You got to help me fix it. And they can't just be like, sorry, I can't. Right. Otherwise, then you start getting these, what I think of as suboptimal solutions of putting generation or assets where they really shouldn't be.
Right. I mean, there are states now that are saying, and I don't know if this is helping or how this is contributing, presumably it's helping, saying, hey, look, we have land, we have workforce, we have opportunity, and if we don't have all of the electrons that you need, if you want to bring your own power, it's got to fit within our regulatory model, but if you want to bring your own power, come talk to us. Let's have a conversation. Do you think that's helpful, or is that noisy, or what do you think?
Well, I think it works, but once again, it depends. So you take a place like Ireland, which had to basically create a moratorium until 2028 for new data centers, because the infrastructure, even whatever the air grid, which was the local utility provider, whatever they could do, they still couldn't support more data centers. So data centers then said, fine, we'll show up and we'll tap the gas infrastructure and we'll build on-site generation. And they said, no, that's also prohibited because once again, the infrastructure is not caught up to be able to handle it. Right. And so Ireland's having to turn away data center customers, and no matter what they're trying. Right. Singapore, Taiwan, so they've all got similar challenges, right? And I think if you're a giant state like, say, Texas, where you've got abundant energy and lots of land and whatever, maybe you can do that. But in other places, if you were trying this in like Ireland, you can't. Once again, that's why the two sides really have to get together and put their best minds on thinking through the problems and how to make it happen. There are all sorts of creative ways to do it. It's just a matter of trying to find the right solution for the right location and not bringing the same 5 approaches every time.
Does it feel sometimes like it's elbows out, like it's, because I literally heard that or felt that I've been with this company for over 20 years. I've never felt that before. And I don't know that I've directly felt it. I don't work in the energy group, but nobody expected the tsunami. And so I think that's fair. And if it takes you a moment, if you're in a little 2-person dinghy, you can turn it immediately. But if you're in an aircraft carrier, you cannot. It's a lot of coordination. It's a narrow harbor, these things. And it feels like a little bit, again, outside looking in, that elbows can get out like, this is your fault. No, this is your fault. If you had predicted it better. Well, if you had more capability in process and procedure, bro, we all want to lead to human flourishing.
Right.
We all want to do it safely. We want our community, our state, our nation to not be at a disadvantage. We want to do it in a sustainable way for the environment and our natural resources. Why are our elbows out so much? It feels like, or is it just my imagination?
No. I mean, I think we're in a moment in time. I think we would all recognize that. I think everything in society is more elbows out than it probably should or needs to be. I mean, I grew up here in the Deep South. I'm used to being polite and courteous and wanting to figure out ways to work together, make us both successful. But it seems like the national conversation is like, it's my way or the highway.
Right.
And I think that trickles down in subtle ways in many things that we do. And it creates, whether perceived or actual, this sort of challenging environment. That being said, I got asked once when I was at Google, hey, I guess it's really different working here than in a utility. And I said, well, I have a shocking confession, which is that at a utility, they're driven by data, right? They're all engineers. At a technology company, we're driven by data because we're all engineers. At a utility, they have to have operations up 24/7, 365. Right. Anybody that operates a data center knows they have to have their operations up 24/7, 365. Safety is paramount in both organizations. Like are we a consensus-driven culture at Google? Yes, we are. Guess what? Utilities are too.
Right.
And you start finding like, wait a minute, we are a utility. Right. I remember I told that to Thomas Kurian, who's head of cloud at Google once, and I got this really funny look. And I said, no, we are a utility. We're just a digital utility for digital infrastructure, but we're a utility. And we have all the same culture and all the same issues and all the same risk aversion that they do. We just need to start realizing that we all come from the same point of view, and we need to work together.
Yeah. It's terrifying. Please don't take this as a disrespectful thing when the attorney in me is speaking of, can't we all just get along, and with such a reasonable perspective? I'm like, okay, paradigm has shifted.
I just think that often we have either ingrained assumptions about what the other party is or isn't trying to do, or we don't quite understand well enough our own limitations or capabilities to understand that we actually have room to wiggle on an issue. I was talking with the utility about this recently. They had some terms and conditions that they'd written, and they were very proud of what they'd written. And I said, okay, I'm going to put on my data center hat and read this back to you. And this looks like all the risk is mine, all the benefit is yours, and anything that happens, basically, you're going to get all the goodies for. And I said, I know that's not what you intend. You intended to write this in a way that would let you work with the regulator and give you wiggle room to negotiate the contract. But the average data center person who doesn't come from your world doesn't know that's why you've written it this way. So you're going to have to be really clear and explain that to them in the first conversation. I think we've just lost that art, or we are so used to seeing things in our own lens that we don't think, okay, well, let me see if I can explain this. Not to be rude or insulting, but to show you my cards and what I'm trying to do, and let's figure this out together. And I know that's weird coming from an attorney whose life should be all about litigation.
You're a Southern attorney, it's okay.
But I think we actually are far more alike than we realize, and we have far more cards to play with than we perhaps realize. And it's just a matter of having those conversations and figuring out how to make things work. I would say if there was one motive that hopefully every data center company understands about the utilities that they're dealing with, is that every one of those utilities absolutely wants to be working with those data center companies. They will figure out a way to roll out the red carpet and make things happen for them. The challenge is the regulatory environment they've got, perhaps the legal structures that they've got in place, financials. There's always some challenge that they've got to deal with. It's a matter of having that conversation up front, saying where are your challenges? Here are mine. How do we make it work?
Right. As we're trying to pursue carbon-free, we love to talk about SMRs or these future things. They're future things. One day I'm going to be able to walk into my house and say, computer, roast beef sandwich, or whatever. And I know it's going to be there. But it may not be in the next 3 to 5 years. So where does this fit into the conversation?
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, I think sustainability has almost become a charged word these days.
Really?
Yeah, and it could be a good thing or a bad thing. I tend to not think of it as a litmus test for one's political affiliation or one's rightness or wrongness. I think of it differently, that what we're ultimately trying to do with sustainability is become more efficient and less wasteful at whatever it is we are doing. And if that's the lens that we define sustainability to be, that should be everyone's mission every day, right? We always want to get better at doing whatever we're doing. And so in that sense, the activity that I've seen, whether it be data centers or utilities, like they're all trying to get better. How we do it, though, that's a real struggle, because if you think about, say, solar production, right? It's very intermittent. It goes up and down. Data centers consume energy round the clock, kind of in a steady state.
Yeah.
And the mismatch between those two needs to be addressed some way.
Right.
There are expensive ways to do that. There are cheap ways to do it. But the key thing is that all the technologies that we could use to be sustainable or not have trade-offs. And what we're trying to do is find the lowest cost, best trade-offs to really do whatever it is we're trying to do, which is why you hear conversations about SMRs. In the same breath, you hear about them talking about solar and wind and geothermal and regular nuclear reactors. Like they're all part and parcel to kind of get there. It's just what fits, what works, what doesn't, what's cost, how much time do you have? All these sorts of things have to be figured out, but they all are how we would, once again, solve the problem. And I don't think there's like thou shalt, it must be this way. It's like we actually, when you think about power grids, maybe a really sustainable thing to do is to invest in natural gas generation, because it's better than the carbon content of the generation that's on the grid right now. Yes, it's not perfect, but do I need to be perfect, or do I need to have a line of sight to get to perfect? I think that's what we're always trying to do, but what's the timeline? What's the strategy? How do I get there? And I don't have to do it immediately.
I've said a million times on the show, like we imagine what paradise looks like, but we got to eat on the way to paradise. And I don't mean that as to to your point, we're not trying to make an excuse for it. Like I gotta, if we sat here and argued about the value of water to our body, and we could talk about it all day long and we're all in, but I got to make sure that I have oxygen, right? If I'm not breathing, that's going to be a problem way before I get to water.
Right.
And if I don't solve water, that's going to be a big problem way before I get to food.
Right.
Especially in my frame. Like I can ride it out for a while. So, whatever in exposure and all these other things. And so it is, it's complicated, but how do you've got such, not just your background by training, but by experience. You've got all these different facets. You've been both the consumer of, the advisor to, the strategist, the analyst, of all of these different perspectives, which I think is an unusual, really cool. Warren Buffett said, somebody commented on, like, look at how good you've got, look at how good you've got. And he said, look, if this were 200 years ago, I don't know that my particular set of skills, I'd be a shopkeeper at some Midwest thing and very modest, and I'm always cognizant of that. At this time, at this place, with the circumstances that I've had, I try to take advantage of them, and I'm grateful for them. But this is what I've got. And so these eclectic things that you've had come together are great for this point in time. But with that kind of perspective, like, how do you look at it, and how do you help people negotiate through these things without us ascribing motives to whoever's in that conversation?
Well, I don't know that I do a great job of it, but I think it starts with humility. I remember I got asked once, like, have you ever had a moment where you've really learned something, that you didn't expect or whatever? And I was like, Holly, every time I switch jobs, like the first time I became an attorney, my supervising attorney, I hope she's not listening, said, you suck as a writer, unquote. Yeah.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, I really have to get better at that, which, I got better. But you have to come from, to tackle any of these problems and to do it well, you've really got to be in a place of humility to start. I don't have all the answers. I don't know that I'm going to be able to solve it, but boy, you're going to get 110% out of me to try and figure it out. And I think if we all come at it from that attitude, as opposed to saying, well, you must want X, Y, or Z, or you must be with this party or have that affiliation or whatever, like, oh, that stuff doesn't matter, man. Let's just try and let's work towards solving stuff.
Yeah. So speaking of solving stuff, I like your title, the innovation in your last title that I saw. Right now, I think your title is, hey, will work for food. How can I help? But so we're in this. We talked about motos. We've all of these other things. We've talked about the challenges. How do we leverage artificial intelligence, machine learning, automation, skill and negotiation? How do we leverage these things to innovate, and where would you start innovating at, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think there are a couple areas that jump out, at least to me immediately. We'll take one from the power side. We'll take one from the data center side. So from the power side, the way they tend to operate and design their grids and their systems is basically like the human body. You've got one big brain, and then you've got arms and legs out there that the brain is trying to control. Mm-hmm. This works really well when the systems don't have to operate very fast and when there's not a lot of data or action happening. However, as the grids get way more complicated and the state changes, the assets that are on them can go from 0 to on and off in seconds or fractions of a second. You have to figure out how to operate a grid more efficiently, and you can't do it using this sort of top-down approach. Mm-hmm. You have to distribute the problem-solving and the control logic of the grid. I think one of the biggest things that's happening in that space, which will revolutionize how we do everything from the normal work that we do on the grid, but also revolutionize how we think about data centers and how they connect and what they can offer, mm-hmm. is this sort of distributed problem-solving capability for the grid. On the flip side, on the data center side, I always think of data centers as like power plants, which is to say, when we first started doing power plants, we designed them for a specific purpose, and they serve just that utility's customers. Just like today, if Meta puts a data center down, it's just to serve Meta's needs, or mm-hmm. Google or QTS. Like, they're just for particular needs. Mm-hmm. In reality, though, there's lots of spare capacity in the system. Mm. And one of the things I don't see yet is the ability to virtualize the physical infrastructure from the logical infrastructure that's running on top of it. If you can do that, then you can actually take advantage of cost and reliability, water, other capabilities at every data center to virtualize and use the spare capacity that's inherent in the system to either get your stuff on faster or to operationalize around things like a winter storm that's going to knock out power, or power prices that are going to spike, or you're using dirty power from the grid and you don't want it, you want it to be clean. Mm-hmm. These are all sorts of things that you can do if you can virtualize the infrastructure on this side, on the data center side, and allow for optimization across the physical side, like traders do when they're optimizing around assets. Yeah. It's the same thing. And I think that could also revolutionize what's going to happen on the data center side. Rather than be so specific about having a specific asset and specific capabilities, you can now virtualize it.
I love the idea. First of all, you said something that I hadn't really thought of before, haven't heard, and I love it. And it's my misconception of the grid. A lot of times, because I come from the IT world, and a lot of people, when we say network, they don't understand all of the, not just the infrastructure, but the segmentation that I have, out of band, in band, what's the risk profile, what are things doing, the types of connectivity, like all the things that I have. And one of the things that we try to do is work in obviously security, but of a lot of flexibility so I can isolate when I need to, because whether it's maintenance or a malware or something or some performance thing. And so there's complexity. We want as simple design as we can that accomplishes those things. And so if you're not familiar with it, it's just the network, like it's Wi-Fi, it's the whatever. And so I misunderstand the grid all the time in the segmentation needed so that I don't have something roll through and have cascading failures or whatever. So I'd like you to comment on that. But then my second part is this. One of the greatest forms of, at least potential anyway, of virtualization is the cloud.
Sure.
But when we say the cloud,
right, it's
Google has a cloud, IBM has a cloud, Oracle has a cloud, Microsoft has a cloud, AWS has a cloud, and there's a lot of conversation about multi-cloud solutions that people are trying to work on, which is to say it's more sort of asset management. I know what workloads, whatever, but I don't have something moving from Azure over to AWS across to Google or whatever. And those organizations, while they are highly virtualized within their organization, there is not yet that I can see, regardless of, an imperative to do that. And so how do we have that balance? Like if it's a homogeneous system, like this is just Meta's data center, they have so much control. But if it's multi-tenant,
Right.
which is virtualization, if I've got, that's my blade in the chassis, but I got 12 blades in the chassis, I can affect that blade, but I can't just go and affect the chassis. So how do you imagine that? So that's the second part. So the first is this understanding, maybe you can help us to understand the grid and the complexities of segmentation and the different types of grid. And then I love the idea of virtualization. Maybe there's a law of diminishing returns where if we did virtualization, I don't know. Anyway, you understand what I'm...
Yeah, well, I mean, to some degree, they're kind of the same problem, which is to say, let's think about the grid for a moment. The way the grid works, if you think about it as a tree, the very ends of the grid are the leaves. Right now, information from the leaf to get back to the brain can take minutes to hours. You can run high-speed network fiber to all those different areas, but it's prohibitively expensive. Even if you could get all that data back to the brain at the same time, you have to contextualize it. You have to put it a common semantic, and you have to be able to say, like, okay, well, all these data points and all this time series information I can now turn into not just a strategy, but some executable thing, like open this, close that, do this. And it's not just because the grid has so many points of interconnection and so many different branches, you're talking about an incredibly complicated system. In math, we think of this as recursion, which is I can't solve the complicated problem, so I break it into its components, solve those first, and then work my way back up to the big master problem. Power grid kind of needs to work the same way, like a big recursive problem. Solve things at the leaf within limited boundaries, and then work your way back up. That lets the edge of the network operate really fast, but within controllable parameters. And you can then roll that up, and then the grid can operate much more efficiently. Right now, that one brain is trying to think and do for everything. And even from a cybersecurity perspective, that's not really good to have one brain to run the whole thing, right? You can knock that thing out, and then you got problems. When I think of data centers and virtualization, it's almost the same problem. I heard many people say, well, I want, to run on this kind of TPU or GPU, or I need it to have this kind of latency. And I'm like, okay, the lawyer in me says, those are just contract parameters, or the mathematician says, that's just optimization parameters for whatever you want. You can design a system that allows virtualization across it. What you need is the business problem to do it. If we can find a way to shift load slightly amongst data centers, right? Not only can you get more data center capacity built faster, you can better optimize and run the systems and the assets that you got right now. And that's in everybody's best interest.
I don't know, I'm stuck on plane analogies, but I am today. And that is one of the things I've seen work really well in the past is I have a mechanical failure on my Delta plane. That's not what I've seen work great, but I have a mechanical failure. And what Delta then did was, how do I put you on other planes? American, United, Southwest, whatever. I distribute these passengers because I want to keep these passengers happy. And I have these reciprocating agreements with other.
Right.
Now, it can't be an everyday thing because let's figure out what the bigger problem is. But in these unusual circumstances, and the airport's happy with that, like, I need to keep people moving, them loitering around an airport. Sure, and I don't mean a weather thing. I mean some isolated, unusual thing. At least when I've experienced that in the past, they've been pretty darn good with it. And so whatever that future world looks like, I don't know that it's imminent, but I don't see a way of us escaping whether you're a single tenant, you're owned by one of the big hyperscales, or you're a multi-tenant provider like us that's providing capacity to a variety of people, maybe even hyperscales, but there's an incentive. Look, if you have this capacity and the sophistication to connect to the grid or whatever it is, that you can help each other ride through with a boundary. Like, look, if it starts getting overwhelming, you've got the ability to isolate yourself. But hopefully where we started this with innovation, with whatever AI tools that we have to help us to manage that is a much better way forward.
Well, and not only that, but I would say it also aids everyone who's on the grid right now. And what I mean by that is that power plant assets that are fully utilized, you don't have a large baseload plant idling at some minimum level, but you've got it fully maxed out. It's actually lower cost to the system to run it that way. So you can actually get not only lower costs, but you can also get a more reliable system because you have the ability to move load around dynamically. So you want a more reliable grid. You want to have 5 nines of reliability, and you don't necessarily always have, want to have 2 independent sources and all the other sort of infrastructure. You can get that today by virtualizing the capacity. You can also get cheaper energy prices because you're fully utilizing and maximizing those assets. Like everyone benefits from that. And to me, that's why I'm like, okay, I just think that data centers, we're all as technologists going to have to come together to say, we got to solve this, and we have to solve it, once again, with the utilities so that we can co-optimize the dynamics of the electric system with the dynamics of what is digital infrastructure for data centers and make them work in harmony.
Yeah. I've seen it. It's going on right now, like within an organization where what they've said, it used to be that they said, look, my environment that lives in a data center like yours has to be concurrently maintainable. And the way that we got that was the data center was concurrently maintainable, or a +1. For people who don't know what that means, it's like having a spare tire for your car, right? But what they've begun doing, many of them, is I'm not going to pick on any particular hyperscale, but let's just say it's somebody that provides a social media platform or whatever, is they have 8 deployments of their platforms across 8 or 10 different data centers up and down the East Coast. And if any one of those are lost, so within the micro, they have virtualized themselves. So they don't particularly need...
But that's suboptimal, right? Because
it's more optimal than it was.
Absolutely.
Is it as optimal as it could be at the macro? I don't disagree. But again, back to the cloud. That's where I completely get like the esoteric... Can you not see how if we did all this together, sure, well, let's go to Southern Company and Duke or whoever else and say, hey, if you guys would do this together, well, hold on, I got shareholders and I got, so that's what I'm like, I think if it's not the government, maybe there's a celebrity or something somewhere, but there's got to be someone that says like, so I'll use an energy analogy. Had a blackout in New York State, they had several. And afterwards, the industry got together and said, if we don't do something to fix this, there's going to be terrible legislation. There's going to be all sorts of bad stuff that happened to us. And so they created NERC, which is the National Energy Reliability Council, right? And its whole purpose was to set standards for reliability and coordination amongst every utility everywhere in the United States. We need a NERC moment between utilities and data centers, because if utilities are going to keep going their way, they're all going to go 100 different ways, and it's not going to get solved. And if data centers companies go their way, it's also still not going to get solved, and we're going to both be complaining about the other about, man, I just really need infrastructure, and why can't you deliver it? We need to get together and say, like, hey, there are a couple of things that are true imperatives that if we can just solve this for all of us, we all benefit. And let's solve those. One of the things you said earlier when you were talking about the leaves, and then you mentioned a couple times the edge. We in the IT world love to talk. We want to get people to argue about what is something. Does the grid have an edge?
Yeah, the problem is the grid edge is kind of amorphous, probably like it is in the technology world, because the grid edge is at the point where the meter is, where you say, like, this is the area where I deliver power to you and you use it as the customer. Is the edge maybe the closest assets that might affect the power quality and service that is offered at that house? Could be any or all of those things, right? The problem is that the grid is also alive and dynamic, like networks, like the telecommunications network or like IT. And they tend to shift around and reconfigure themselves based on what's going on. Once again, if you're just relying on a single brain to figure that out, it's going to be suboptimal. You have to figure out a way to do it on a distributed basis and be more responsive to whatever is happening at your edge. And the way to do that is to basically push that problem solving down.
Well, we're in Atlanta. I've got a few more things for you, but I got to get you out of here in a reasonable amount of time. So obviously I saved the easy stuff, cough, cough, regulation. You just mentioned that a second ago, and none of us would get in an elevator or an airplane or whatever or a home without regulation. Like, we all agree. If you don't agree, I'm not riding with you. But we've got examples. I know you've lived this in your career. We can look at history. There's onerous business impeding. There's sloppy and dangerous. It gives the illusion of safety, and whether it's financial safety in contracts that really aren't enforceable and aren't real, or actual physical safety. So we want a framework, all of us. I can't imagine that we don't, but we don't want it to be onerous. And I say this from the context of, the United States has got, we've got complexity. I think it's both our feature and it's our challenge. Kind of like Steve Jobs, his chaos of his ingenuity was a feature, and it caused chaos. If you don't harness chaos, you got a bomb. If you harness it too much, you got bureaucracy, and it collapses the whole thing. So when you think about regulation, where we don't want to impose in a draconian way, but we want to work with the White House. We want to work with state legislatures. You want to work with these things. And I don't mean like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, work with them. I mean real stuff. We want our frenemies, our competitors at the table, all of us there to make sure we have many of the things we're talking about from an innovation and interconnected interoperability. How do you help get people to the table? How do you help us to understand the right way to do it, whether it's in your current role or just how you imagine it, so that it's not just slapped down where all of a sudden now it's nobody can be successful doing this?
I tend to think that where people tend to get upset in all of these things is not so much technology per se or in change per se. It's really in feeling like they've been heard and that they have enough runway to get to wherever that outcome is. And if you say like, hey, look, I want to work with you, and you say, great, I want to get my 500 megawatt data center online and I need it tomorrow, like that's going to panic me because I know how long it takes to like put that infrastructure in place.
Right.
And it's going to be a tense conversation. So it's either timeline, right, or it's trying to deal with the change, right? So I think we need to do a lot more of that.
So so we've talked about sort of two groups so far, at broad brush, those that are providing infrastructure, power, whatever, and the customers that are receiving it, the data centers or critical infrastructure. The third leg of the stool is the communities that we're going to operate in.
Oh, absolutely.
And for the longest time, data centers were never in the news. Like we didn't make any noise. And we're primarily we've only been talking about power today, but water, noise, other things are concerns. I think a lot of it is there's a lot of misinformation out there. It's not all incorrect, but usually it's greatly exaggerated. What advice could you give both the utility and a data center operator, or even somebody that's listening that's a community representative, right? On the one hand, I want what I am understanding the benefit of a data center operator. I believe it could bring these things of economic prosperity or whatever to my world, but I don't want to make it onerous and costs. I don't want the natural resources that could be used for these other things to be consumed. So we've got this community. What advice could you give us in how we come to the table, not just from that business perspective, but from a community perspective?
Well, I think there's actually a lesson learned on the utility side that can be helpful for data centers. I think there's also a data center lesson that can be helpful for utilities.
All right.
Let's start with the utility one.
Okay.
Utilities are masters in their ground game in dealing with state and local regulatory bodies, elected officials, you name it, right? Okay. Every day they're having to deal with permitting issues and rights of way and all sorts of...
They're celebrating the opportunity.
They're celebrating that opportunity. It's right. It's also why they have a whole lot of attorneys. When I look at the tech companies, attorneys are people that you call only on the occasion that maybe you have a contract you need to sign, and otherwise they're like, why do we have attorneys?
Right.
In reality, if you are going to be a utility, a digital one, maybe build a ground game like what the actual utilities today have. This can actually help get around a lot of those challenges. It can help you understand the voice of the community and come to them proactively with solutions and listen to them and engage with them. Utilities are incredibly good at this. The data center and digital infrastructure folks need to take a page from their book. On the flip side, you mentioned this earlier when you were talking about I'll use a page from Google's book, Site Reliability Engineering, how we think about digital infrastructure and how we design our stack and our software and our physical infrastructure so that all of the technologies work together well and we have super high reliability, not just in terms of tech, but also in process and procedure. Utilities infrastructure has been largely, as I mentioned, analog and mechanical, and it's now becoming more like the digital infrastructure that data center companies have. To the extent utilities can learn from and adopt similar capabilities that data centers have come, they'll actually be faster and better prepared for managing a much more digital and highly capable system than they were before, because it requires different skills, processes, and procedures, and they can learn that from data center companies. I think both sides have something really important to teach the other. And I really want to see them do that and have those conversations, because I think they can both get that much better for it.
So what's your bold prediction as we wrap up this conversation? What do you think in the next few years? I probably should have prepped you with this call, but whether it's technology development, communication development, what do you think in the next, because we're all sort of in this spot together, what's your bold, we're going to be surprised by, but Raiford called it first?
Oh, well, I've been told ever since I joined the energy industry that it was a boring place, that it was, nothing was really going to happen. And that's been consistently wrong over my entire career. I think first, whatever's going to happen in our space, both energy and the data center side, we're not going to recognize it. Like it's going to, but I think we're going to make it. I think we're going to solve these challenges. I think we're going to get there. I remain an optimist that we're going to actually achieve the outcomes we seek. I don't know how. I mean, I rattled off a few of them, but I'm sure there are like 5 others that I haven't thought of or that they're percolating out there. But I do think we're going to get it. And I think we're going to be surprised at how fast and how cheap we get it.
Wow. Raiford, what haven't we talked about that we should have? I appreciate you coming in.
Oh, you didn't ask me about the Braves or any of the local sports teams. And by the way, I got to say that I always like all the teams that lose, so maybe we shouldn't talk about that.
Yeah. But we are in the SEC. And I don't know that I, of course, want Georgia to continue their national championship competition and winning. But as long as it's not Ohio State, I got to tell you, those fans are just, it used to be for me Tennessee, but the Ohio State people, I'm like, come on, be a little bit more gracious. And they're all going to send me hate mail now when I go up to Columbus here in a few months. Raiford, thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
My great pleasure. Hey, look, if you enjoyed that conversation, hit the like button. And if you loved it, hit subscribe. We'll see you next time, everybody. Have a good one.